When we continue to perform a task in more or less the same way repeatedly, what happens is that our efforts go down, and with that also our performance. And when our performance go down, it leads to rework, incomplete work results, which of course puts a lot of stress and pressure on us. But it also leads to boredom because we feel extremely bored when we're not challenged. And that is what happens. And when we feel boredom, we start to procrastinate. And when we procrastinate, we create backlogs of stuff to do, miss deadlines and so forth, which puts a lot of stress on us. And that leads to work dissatisfaction. Now, most of these things are actually self-inflicted. It's not so much about the work environment. Hi, I'm Stefan Falk. I work as a performance coach, and I help people to achieve things they didn't think they were capable of. Today, we're going to talk about intrinsic motivation. And intrinsic motivation is probably the most important skill you can master. You need to know how to turn it on when you need it. And if you do, you will be able to learn skills much faster than anyone else. You will be able to work effectively toward any type of goal or dream you have. And you will also enjoy high work satisfaction or satisfaction in whatever you need to do or choose to do.
Welcome back to another episode of Everforward Radio. We are here today in the studio back in New York with legendary performance coach Stefan Falk, who has written the book literally on intrinsic motivation. Today, we're going to be diving into learn to love your work and succeed as never before, but in ways you probably haven't thought about: finding motivation, developing motivation, and keeping motivation that really have at least not come top of mind for me in a long time. So with that, Stefan, welcome and thank you for being here.
Thank you. It's a pleasure being here.
We were just talking off air, and I thought this is the best way to kind of introduce this topic for the episode. Motivation, especially intrinsic motivation that comes from ourself. And we'll get to the definition here in a minute. But first and foremost, the energetic toll of motivation, I think, is something most people don't think of, or don't think of until after the fact, of how draining and tired it is trying to keep up and trying to perform and trying to stay motivated and stay plugged in. Can you describe for us, please, what is this energetic toll, this energetic current of motivation?
Well, I think that the problem that we all face in terms of motivation and in terms of feeling good about ourselves is that our brain rewards us much more for conserving energy, because conserving energy has been one of the key survival strategies for us as human beings for the 200,000 years we have lived. To have a surplus of energy has been extremely important for our survival, and if we didn't have that survival strategy, probably we would not, be around here. Okay, so that's one. So figuring out how to tap into that energy in a smart way to unlock our intrinsic motivation, I think that is actually the key challenge that human beings should take on.
You were describing, before we hit record, this beautiful analogy of where I think a lot of people struggle most with staying motivated, and that's at work. You were saying quite literally, we log on, but then check out. We log on, but then mentally log out. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, what happens, I think, typically in a work situation is that as soon as we think psychologically we know how to do something, we know how to perform a task, we tend to log out because that's really smart from an energy saving standpoint. But it is pretty useless, I would say, from a motivation standpoint. Because what happens is that when we continue to perform a task in more or less the same way repeatedly, what happens is that our efforts go down, and with that also our performance. And when our performance go down, it leads to rework, incomplete work results, which of course puts a lot of stress and pressure on us. But it also leads to boredom because we feel extremely bored when we're not challenged. And that is what happens. And when we feel boredom, we start to procrastinate. And when we procrastinate, we create backlogs of stuff to do, miss deadlines and so forth, which puts a lot of stress on us. and that leads to work dissatisfaction. Now, most of these things are actually self-inflicted. It's not so much about the work environment. That is my experience of working with, I don't know how many thousands of people over the years, past 25 years.
You kick off the book with a word, and this word is really a through line in your work that really kind of surprised me when we're talking about motivation, and that's the L word, love. Is it really that simple? I'm curious, why did you start the book? Why is the crux of your work learning how to love any activity? Is that the key to this, to staying motivated and tapping into developing intrinsic motivation, is we have to really love what we do?
Yeah, I mean, what I mean with that is that we need to love the experience of what we are doing, because that's intrinsic motivation. And we will have that magnificent experience where we feel completely immersed in what we're doing. We're almost losing our sense of self in it. That's when we perform our very best. And the logic behind the beautiful experience we have is that it's our brain then rewarding us for working with a challenging problem that interests us, and that leads to that we develop ourselves. We learn something new, and that's the second survival strategy we have used as human beings, besides conserving energy. The problem is, of course, that the conserving energy is much stronger than the expansion, thing here. And in my experience, there are no boring tasks. There are no too difficult tasks. There are no uncomfortable tasks. There are no uninteresting tasks. There are only uninteresting or boring or uncomfortable or difficult ways to think about them. Because it's how you think about what you're supposed to do that decides on whether you will love it or not.
Can you break that down a little bit more for us, please? Because I'm sure someone listening right now is like, Stefan, I really disagree. There's this task I have to do at work or in life that is so mundane, is so monotonous, is so boring. I'm not challenged by it. Literally, a monkey could do it. Insert any Bible or BS excuse here. How then can we apply what you're talking about to something like that?
Well, first of all, who is the agent? Are you the agent, or is the task the agent? Is the task telling you exactly how to perform it? No, it's not. Maybe on an overall level. So there is an unlimited opportunity to experiment in how you do things. That's number one. Number two, a very easy way to do this is to create what I call an exciting outcome for the task. To actually spend some time to think about, okay, if I perform this task in a different way, in a better way, what could be a really exciting outcome for me to achieve when I perform the task? And you can think about that in different dimensions. You can think about it in terms of the time you use, to perform the task. My favorite, which I use every day, and I also promote my clients to use, is to cut time drastically for something. If I have a coaching session with a client, and we have had 50 coaching sessions and they have all been good, but I have a sense that, I can up my game a little bit. I often think like this, okay, now I'm meeting Chase here on Thursday. We have an hour and a half. What if I only had 15 minutes? How would I use those 15 minutes with him to make sure that he got a really, really great result? That's an exciting
We only have about
way.
6 more minutes then.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's one way to do it. Think about time, reducing time. Another way, which is also an aphrodisiac for intrinsic motivation, is to think about the value for others. Because when you think about it, everything in an organization, everything I do in an organization, the purpose of that is to enable someone else to do something else. That's how it's set up. So if I perform this task that I think is so mundane, so repetitive, and so whatever, but that's in my head, and I perform it in a way that really maximizes the value for others, for the people dependent on it, how would I then perform it? That sets you up for intrinsic motivation. So that's just a couple of examples.
I love the time example. I think that really comes to mind for me most as well, of when I've tried to flip something on its head or make something fun that's monotonous, or also just to think creatively. I think that has worked wonders for me to just flex different creative muscles, to go about something that I've done a million different ways, but ask, what's the 1,000,001th way I could do it? That just really, it inserts a pause, which I think is so necessary in most choices we make in life. But then to just go, all right, even though I know how to do it and it can be done, what if there's just that one other way? How else could it possibly be done? And then you really get to like get this kind of like God's eye view, objective really view, and tackle it in a totally different way.
No, I think before the show we talked a little bit about sports, and it's really interesting if you use sports as a proxy, for instance, tennis, and then we place the typical behavior of a professional in learning a skill into tennis. It would be like Rafael Nadal. He learns how to hit a perfect backhand, from the baseline. Okay, but that's what he does. He doesn't learn how to hit the perfect backhand from any other place on the court. Will he win any games? Obviously not. So he needs to practice hitting a backhand from every place in the court all the time. And that's the same thing with tasks. No moment is the same. So you need to learn how to be experimental with how you perform your tasks, do them differently, and really read the moment, what is really best to do now.
You also talk in a section that I really connected with about mastering the art of baby steps. What do you mean by that? And how do baby steps serve us in pursuit of tapping back into intrinsic motivation?
Well, baby steps is something that I really, really had to use when I finished the book.
You had to use it yourself?
Yes. That was such a painful experience because I had written almost, I think, 80% of the book when everything was finalized with my publisher. So I didn't have too much to finish, and I already had outlined the remaining chapters, what they were supposed to be about. But for whatever reason, when I started to write, my mind was telling me, this is complete crap. This is, why do you write this? This is like, not even value. So, okay, then I stopped and I didn't do anything, okay? And then I tried again the next day, and I had 6 weeks, so it was a lot of time. But what happened is that, given that I have no progress whatsoever, it affects my sleep, and I don't sleep well because this becomes some kind of anxiety in my head. And then the next day when I'm tired, my attempt, when I do it, is not really that much better. So I just have to, I need to do this in a different way. And that's what I call baby steps. So what I did is basically say, tomorrow I'm going to write for 20 minutes. And I'm not going to review the quality of what I've done. But I'm going to make sure that I have some time after those 20 minutes so I can spend more time should I come in the flow, which I didn't. But I spent those 20 minutes. And the only thing I did, I celebrated the effort of the 20 minutes. Amazing. Because I did something. And then I continued. And I think after 5-6 days, my mind started to change its opinion about what I was doing and seeing that, this is not totally bad, okay? And then it became sort of a positive spiral here. And thinking about what really caused me to end up in this situation of I would say, massive anxiety and procrastination is that my mind, for whatever reason, viewed this as a high-stakes situation, okay? And I had to realize that was the case and then lower the stakes for myself, which was those like baby steps. And you celebrate effort, not outcome in this case, because you need to sort of rewire the situation to something that can then over time enable your intrinsic motivation. Is that?
Yeah, but it makes me think, because I've been here, if I celebrate the baby steps, if I celebrate the effort, not the outcome, it sometimes delays the outcome or deviates the outcome more than it should have been from the beginning, what I intentionally set out to do. And not to get down a rabbit hole of like process over the prize kind of thing, but if we are in pursuit of a specific task or a specific goal, we want that task completed. We want that goal achieved. but it is important to celebrate the little wins along the way. But is there a point when maybe that inadvertently supersedes the goal? Or are we getting too far away from the goal or the task? Maybe we're celebrating the wins too much. Like, what is the right amount of celebrating the baby steps along the way so that we're feeding still in pursuit of that same goal?
Well, I think it's in my case, in this situation, it was that it didn't matter, I felt, how I tried to achieve a great outcome, every time I wrote. It was not, my mind didn't allow me to do that or view what I did as being good enough. So the thing I could do, the only thing I knew is that I need to continue trying. Because if I don't, nothing will happen. So I need to continue trying. And I know what I've written so far is really good. So I know I have it in me. It's just that for whatever reason, it doesn't come out. So the only way forward is then to spend the time and then celebrate that. And eventually it will happen, which it did. And eventually it all happens. And because for me, it was, lowering the stakes a little bit and doing that by celebrating the effort. And then when I came into it, obviously I delivered everything, that I wanted to deliver.
Is it important then, how do I want to say this? Is it important then to have such clarity of the end outcome we want, as well as every increment along the way, so that when we celebrate the incremental wins, the little steps, we know without doubt it's serving that larger goal? An example that comes to mind for me, my background being, in health and wellness, I always think, all right, if someone wants to lose or gain 20 pounds, in order for that to happen, they have to lose or gain 1 pound, 1 more pound, 1 more pound, 1 more pound, so on and so forth. So like, celebrating that would absolutely serve that end goal, because there are clear requirements for the baby step and that kind of that finish line. Would you agree with that? And what happens if we don't have that clarity of the value of the baby steps and the end marker?
No, I totally agree with that. That if it's an outcome that is beyond what you can create sort of in the present moment, here and now, like performing a task or having a an interview, you need to break it down to something that is meaningful here and now. A short-term result that you can see the result immediately after you do something for it. That's extremely important. So I agree with that.
Okay,
totally. Because that also prevents you from postponing your weight losing activities. But I have 2 months to lose 20 pounds or 2 years or whatever it is. So maybe today I don't have to focus on it. I can start to focus on it on Saturday, and then Saturday comes. Well,
it's Monday.
Whatever.
January
it is.
1st.
Yeah. No. So it's extremely important to break it down, and any goal you have needs to be broken down to something that shapes what you do and how you do here and now. Otherwise, it will not work.
So then, is time the greatest thief of intrinsic motivation?
Thief.
Because what I'm kind of hearing in your last statement there was, we can have clarity of the baby steps, we can have clarity of the end result, but when we insert the inappropriate amount of time between them, that's when we kind of falter, right? Or maybe we don't get there, or we lose motivation, or don't develop the proper amount along the way to get us to the end result.
I don't know if time is the biggest thief. I think what robs us from the opportunity to experience intrinsic motivation and to feel really accomplished is, again, this hardwired focus on conserving energy. Okay, it is
fundamental. It comes back to that, huh?
I would say that is the root cause behind many problems on individual level, organizational level, and society level. That sort of energy conserving thing that we have. So that's what robs us, from having an excellent life, I would say.
Well, we've gotten quite a bit in, and I have failed to ask you to define our terms. Intrinsic motivation. Before you give us your definition of that, please, how do you think most people define it? How do you think most people define it? What do you think is maybe the most common incorrect definition of it? And how do you define it? Is it any different? And how and why do we kind of, switch understanding what intrinsic motivation is so we have a better, application to get there?
I don't have any good sense of what's the most incorrect definition of it. I think
your personal.
Yeah, I think that most people that I meet have a pretty correct definition of it. That it's when we really enjoy doing what we are doing, that's when we are intrinsically motivated, and which is
we do
correct.
It because we like to, because we want to.
I think that the incorrectness is that people think that it's task specific. So certain tasks are intrinsically motivating, and certain tasks are not. That's the big mistake I think they make. Now,
you're saying that's not the case.
That's not the case.
Okay.
No task is intrinsically motivating, and some tasks are not. No, that's not the case. It's how you think about it. I can think about a few situations that it's very, very hard to be intrinsically motivated.
What would be an example of one?
Well, you go to the doctor and you get a very bad message. Okay, that you suffer from a serious illness or something, or losing a loved one. Okay, but if we look at those situations, we can probably count them on the fingers of one hand. That fundamentally it is impossible to be intrinsically motivated. But beyond that, most situations actually are that we can be. My definition of intrinsic motivation is it happens when we are involved in solving a challenging problem that interests us. And interest us is very important. Both the words, all the words problem and challenging and interest us. Okay, that's when we experience intrinsic motivation. And then that experience is, like we talked about before, that you feel fully immersed in the activity. It's almost like you experience all the emotions at the same time. You have the emotion of anxiety, a little bit like, what's really happening now? I'm going to pull this off.
Is this the kind of the Neo moment you were talking about earlier?
Yeah. It's the Neo moment,
Yeah.
in the Matrix, when time slows down and you see what's happening and you can figure out potentially what's going to happen next. You can look in your portfolio of skills and tools and whatever and apply it and experiment. Okay. My mentor for many years, Sheikh Sent High, he called this flow, when you're in flow. And I think that's correct. That's the highest level of intrinsic motivation. I think there are lower levels too, when you're just like insanely concentrated. Okay, that's also a way of being intrinsically motivated. And obviously then the problem is that very few things tend to naturally interest us, especially in a work environment.
Right.
I think mostly because when we work, our sense of autonomy is lower. First of all, work for many people is something we have to do. It's nothing potentially that we choose to do. And then secondly, when you work in a big organization, you feel that you just, whatever you do is decided by someone else and so forth. You have much more autonomy than you think. It's basically something in your head. But even the things that you love at work today, at some point, they have a tendency to be less interesting. For the reasons I said before, that you stop challenging yourself when you perform them, okay?
That's the brutal honesty.
Yeah. And again, if so the importance of intrinsic motivation, the purpose is not to go around being intrinsically motivated all the time. That's an impossibility. Because then you will end up in analysis paralysis. What should I do now? I have so many opportunities to be intrinsically motivated.
I'm so motivated to do everything all the time, no problem.
Yeah, but think about it.
Careful what you ask for.
Waking up, you will not be able to leave bed because you will think, what should I do? I have so many opportunities. No. So that's not the purpose. The purpose is only to recognize when you need to switch it on and know how to do it. That's the purpose. And anything that you think is boring, uncomfortable, too difficult, or uninteresting, things you have to do, that's when you need it. That's when you need it. Now, it's interesting. I met a few people, not professionally, but that when they understood what I did, they wanted to talk to me about themselves. And one person specifically, an entrepreneur, he said to me, well, I'm at this stage now in the business, and there's some things that simply don't interest me. Okay, for instance, I think he said people management is a thing that doesn't interest. I'm more of an ideas guy, and I want to ponder ideas and do things like that. And so how what would you recommend? How should I think about it? And then I said to him, well, first of all, just to set the record straight, people management or people development, whatever, it's not rocket science. Okay. But secondly, the most important question that you should ask yourself, what's your dream? What's your aspiration? Who do you want to become, in life? And then ask yourself if people leadership is something that you should learn to like and love and perform.
Powerful question. Yeah. I think a lot of us think we should be asking questions like that.
Yeah. But we don't. I mean, I'm perfectly fine with anyone saying, I think this is boring. And at the end of the day, I don't have to do it. But don't do it. Unless you want to practice to unlock your intrinsic motivation. But so I'm not sort of saying that everybody needs to be intrinsically motivated about everything. No. You just need to unlock it when you need it for your own good.
Yeah.
And I can guarantee you 3 things. If you learn how to do that, you will learn new skills and master new areas much faster than the average person does. You will also be able to work effectively toward any type of goal or dream you have, because any type of goal or dream will entail stuff that you think is boring or whatever it is, okay? If you don't pursue them, with great performance, you will not be successful. And the third thing is that you will also be able to sustain great satisfaction in whatever you do or need to do. That's what I can promise you.
Amazing. Those are great takeaways. Thank you for sharing that. I hope the listener goes back and rewinds a little bit of that. That's my clip. I want to go back quite a bit, actually, something you said that stuck with me. I think it kind of ties into what you were talking about earlier about the energetic part of motivation, and that's concentration. Correct me if I'm wrong, but you said something along the lines of we can find intrinsic motivation when we are better able to concentrate. In that kind of concentrative flow state, that's when I think the floodgates of possibility for intrinsic motivation really open up, which kind of makes me want to ask the question, if we want to become more intrinsically motivated through the process of concentration, how do we increase concentration to get there? How do we know we're actually concentrating in a manner that supports that?
Well, I think the question is, how do we concentrate effectively with minimal energy spending?
Even better. Yes. It's like you're the professional or something.
Yeah.
Yes.
And it's what I don't know if I mentioned this in the book or I call it that, but I call, you need to develop different mental models basically for how you approach different situations. In the book, I have something that I believe is the only 5 questions you need to ask yourself to understand any type of problem, which is the question, what is the problem? how big is the problem, which is by far the most important question you can ask yourself when you face any type of problem. Unfortunately, that question is seldom asked in organizations, which leads to, I would say that almost 80% of the problems people work on are either non-existent or less important or addressed in the wrong way, okay? Because that question is not asked for several reasons. The third question is, why does the problem exist? The fourth question is, what alternative solutions exist, including doing nothing if the problem is not big? And then the last question is, what's the best solution? My brain works like that. So whenever I sit and listen to anyone, I have those, as a mental model, those questions programmed in my head.
That's your framework.
Yeah. So everything you say to me, if I'm supposed to help you with something, I just log everything you say in those 5 different buckets, okay? That is relaxed concentration, but very effective concentration. So it's about developing those mental models for concentration. So now I'm in a learning situation, okay? How should I structure my learning situation? Well, a good way to structure it is, number one, to ask yourself, what is it that I want to learn and why? Okay? And then you can structure everything you learn in the moment by things you already know.
Absolutely,
and things you don't understand. That makes the concentration effective. Because if you go in to a concentration mood without having that structure, you get drained.
I think we all took a step back right there and just really let land what you just said and got very honest with ourselves. I think that last part would probably drive a lot of attention. There's another side to motivation. We can't say intrinsic motivation and not say extrinsic motivation. We can't talk about how can we tap into inner strengths and inner tools without recognizing external ones. I think it's important to recognize when one is going to serve us more, or maybe where to start for a certain task or certain goal. But I'm curious, what role do you think extrinsic motivation has on intrinsic motivation? Or is intrinsic completely independent?
No, I think they are linked together. And for me, it is it's a question of balance. You know, if you are too extrinsically motivated by fame or money or whatever it is, what's the problem with that? Well, I don't see any ideological problem with it, okay? Nothing. But there is a risk that you will find too few of the potential, activities that you should pursue as being totally relevant, because you don't see the clear link between that extrinsic goal, okay? And then you will discover after some time that I probably should have done that, because then I would have built a certain skill that now I would need in order to do this. So I think that it's a question of balance. And what I've seen in myself and in clients and other colleagues I've helped is that if you really want to go for great sort of extrinsic rewards, whatever it is, write a book or be known for something or whatever, what's going to take you there is intrinsic motivation, because intrinsic motivation leads to mastery. And mastery, no matter what happens in our society, will never go out of fashion. Isn't that true?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. And the beauty with mastery is that you feel so fulfilled, when you reach it. I remember when I was a kid, and this is when my journey started, when I got the piano, and I was fantasizing so much how I wanted it to sound. And I was hammering away on that piano 2-3 hours a day, and my mother just regretted she had bought me the piano. She was like, do you have to play so much? Because it sounded so terrible. But I persisted, probably because I had this fantasy. And fantasy is such a appreciated, theme. It's so important. We should talk about that. And I persisted. And then just one day, something happened. And I just felt that this is different. And I could play. And it sounded great. And my mom came, was it you playing? Okay.
Was it you?
Yeah. Oh, that's what she said. And it's like that experience of persisting the pain of the delta between where you want to be and where you actually are, and then pushing yourself through that, and then one day it just happens. That experience, you want to relive that again. And I find that too few people do that. Too few people understand the power of mastery, not just from a success standpoint, but also from a, like I would say, mental strength, psychological well-being standpoint, going through that.
Let's go into fantasy. What role does fantasizing have in intrinsic motivation?
Well, if you think about it, we have a brain that's the best simulator, ever created. Nothing will even come close to it. So the brain cannot discern between what is really happening and what is just thoughts and emotions. So when you fantasize and you have very strong fantasies, you can actually make whatever you're fantasizing about to happen in your fantasy, which means that your brain basically creates feelings that is very similar to if this thing would actually happen, in the real world. If you repeat those fantasies over time, the fantasy will not be enough. You will at some point want to act it out. Okay?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
But also fantasizing it, not just like fantasizing, you actually think about how to achieve that you want to achieve. So it's also some form of problem solving and planning. Also, in your fantasy, it is safe to think about unknown areas that you need to pursue in order to come close to your fantasy. So in real life, when you then start to act out, you have some familiarity with those unknown areas. It's such a powerful thing. Now, I should say that I learned myself about the power of fantasy. I didn't know what it was until I spent some time with John Douglas, the famous FBI profiler, from the behavioral science unit at the FBI. And he said to me that a common denominator between serial killers are their fantasies, okay? Because they fantasize so much about what they want to do that they eventually need to act it out.
So then is there a threshold of fantasizing that we should be aware of so that we don't turn into serial killers?
Well, obviously it's the content of your fantasy,
Right,
okay?
yeah.
But I mean, it unfortunately it works really well when you have those most terrible, inhuman thoughts. But it works super well when you have the good thoughts also, the good fantasies.
Well, I think the same is true, absolutely, when I think about my interpretation of the most successful people, people that, build billion-dollar empires, people that just quit their job to pursue their dream and they just have a happy, healthy living doing it, or they motivate others by their actions. They almost kind of have this, like, to quote a previous guest, shout out Charlie Rocket, delusional optimism. And I think this delusional optimism, in a way, is fantasy. They live in a fantasy world. We live in a fantasy world. Anybody that leaves safety, security of your home, of a paycheck, of all of these things, you're fantasizing about what could be. You're in a different simulation. But then when you do it and you turn that fantasy into reality, are you really living in a reality? Because it's not a reality that most of us can relate to. You turn fantasy into just something up here to something that is actually tangible.
I totally agree. I just and I have not figured out how to be more systematic about teaching my clients how to fantasize. But I log that as my next little development project for myself. How do you actually do that in a way that's meaningful and systematic? But it's extremely important. I had a client actually that I got. It's a big financial institution, and he got an interim position, and the setup was the staging of it was that this person got this position, now interim position, was like an executive position. But there's great doubt whether he will pull it off or not. Okay. fine, start to work with the person, and he just became a raving success. And I have to say that, did I have anything to do with? Yeah, perhaps a little bit. But I asked him, tell me now, didn't you fantasize a lot about how it would look if you would be super successful? Yes, I did, all the time. And obviously, when he does that, he has a way of shaping how he does things that fits a little bit with his fantasy, you know. So I told him, you need to share that, with your people, the power of it, because it's so immensely powerful.
Would you maybe describe fantasizing as being similar to being creative? Is fantasy in the same bucket as creativity? If people being more creative, are they tapping into, is this really just another version of fantasy? Are they kind of one and the same, or do you feel there's a difference there?
I find creativity is something else for me. Creativity is much more about being so engrossed in an area where you start to see new patterns and new opportunities, key insights.
Okay.
And then you're able to formulate those insights in a way that those are accepted by the people, safeguarding this domain or whatever it is. And then they are implemented. And by implementing them, the domain changes. Okay.
Interesting. Okay.
Creativity for me is not coming up with, interesting ideas. Okay. It's the whole process. And this is very, I'm very sort of subscribing to my mentor's theory around, or description of creativity as being a systems process, this with different components in it. So creativity also comes with intrinsic motivation.
How so?
Yeah, obviously, because intrinsic motivation leads to that you go deeper and deeper and deeper into your tasks, and you feel that you work in. So you create mastery of that. When you create mastery, you actually understand the domain you operate in, and then you can see opportunities for innovation in it.
Yeah. Another word that comes to mind for me when I was reading the book and getting to know your work more was I was trying to put myself in the shoes of, all right, or really kind of analyze, how do I get intrinsically motivated? Whether that's from the get-go or I can reflect back on it. Part of me honestly kind of just feels like I've always kind of had this, a little bit of natural get up and go and like, let's do it. And, I don't need really a lot of external motivators, very rarely, to accomplish the things that I want in day-to-day tasks, but, even thinking outside of the box. But one thing that came to mind for me was intention. The power of intention is for me, I think, almost immeasurable. But how I got to intrinsic motivation from intention was, for me, intention is when I think about what I want to happen, and then when I analyze what actually did happen, it's kind of that sweet spot where those two ships, if you will, kind of pass. And there's this moment where I realize something is happening, and it's very, very, very close to what I wanted to happen. It might not be the exact same thing, but there's this resonance, this parallelism happening right then and there. That for me is like, it's like intrinsic motivation after the fact, if that makes sense. It's like the power of, I said I was going to do something. I have an idea of what I want to happen. And I believe I know how to get there. And then sometimes that happens exactly and sometimes not. And for me, that kind of goes back retroactively and feeds into intrinsic motivation, being driven, for me at least, from intention. What's your take on that? Does intention have a play here in intrinsic motivation?
Yes, obviously. But let me take a step back here, because and I don't. We just met, so I don't know you.
Right,
but my sense is that you're sort of a yes can do, optimistic and pretty curious person. Okay, you think that life consists of a never-ending flow of opportunities to discover stuff. Okay. which also means that you leave very little room for your brain to think negative thoughts.
Yeah.
That is the first step to even come close to anything that makes intrinsic motivation a sustainable focus, skill, or whatever you want to call it in your life. You
Dismissing
need
negative
to
thoughts.
erase negativity. Unfortunately, I've seen about 100 organizations, more or less pretty close. And negativity is, I think, the default, mode in organizations. They complain about this, they complain about that. This decision taken now. That's a stupid decision, even though people don't even understand the decision, but it's stupid anyway, okay? Now, what people don't understand are two things. The brain becomes good at what you allows it to work on. So that's neuroplasticity, okay? So that's not controversial.
That's science. It's literally neuroscience.
It's not controversial. What's controversial is to act upon it. So it means that if you repeatedly think negative thoughts, your brain will become really good at it. Why? Because it strives for perfection. Because perfection means minimal energy required to sustain that thought pattern. Okay, so that means that your brain will be even better in identifying situations where you should have those negative thoughts, because I know how to do it. It's almost like the law of the instrument, but for the brain. Okay?
Right, yeah.
Now we should think about this: that negative thoughts or negativity slows your brain down. Okay, because it is a pre-stage of fight or flight. And in that stage, the body is then preparing itself for a potential fight or flight situation. So it turns off the organs in the body that, to save energy for fight or flight, or organs then that also might be viewed as irrelevant for a fight or flight situation, which higher thinking is, because it's too slow. Okay? But negativity also impairs your immune system, so you become more prone to sickness. And obviously, negativity tends to hijack your mind, so you tend to think about it a lot, and it goes out of proportion. An example: next week, if you have a meeting, I remember in the beginning when I was doing podcasts, because it's such a new situation for me, and I really dislike to be in the spotlight. I don't mind meeting with clients and sitting like that, but being in the spotlight since I was a kid was something that I don't like. So if I have a podcast, the first podcast coming up a week from now, that sort of easily makes me feel that the whole next week is bad.
Oh, really?
Because I have this thing coming up.
You have that coming up. Yeah.
Okay. So negativity also tends to hijack our minds and distract us. Okay. And what we do then in order to release the burden is not to think about this thing that's going to happen that's bad. Which means when you come to that situation you think is very uncomfortable, you will not be prepared. So the bad experience will be a self-fulfilling prophecy. So
truly,
the first step in order to start a journey toward, a better work life or a better life, whatever you want to achieve, reach your goals, whatever it is to erase negativity from it. Okay? And you can do that by in different ways. One thing I recommend clients that have a tendency to sometimes blame others for failures or whatever it is, or feel sorry for themselves, which is something that everyone should just stop doing, is to simply put in their calendar once a day something they call blame time or negativity time or whatever it is. And then you say, okay, at that point, every day, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to blame everyone for my failures, and I'm going to think negative thoughts or whatever. And they very soon realize that I have absolutely no valid reasons for this negativity. Okay. So why is it so easy for us to be negative? Well, that's also going back to this energy saving thing. Because when things go wrong, if there is someone else's fault Obviously, that's smart. I don't have to do anything. It was you, Chase. This podcast didn't come out well.
Great, it's your fault.
It's because
all
of
off me.
your crappy questions. I'm without no responsibility here. You understand?
Yeah.
It's so that's the first, and we could probably do 10 podcasts about negativity because it's so important. Just take it out of your life. Don't have opinions about anything that you don't know anything about. Okay, that's good. Don't dare to say I don't know. If someone at work wants to talk bad about another person, refuse to participate. Solve it with the other person. If someone makes a decision you don't understand, don't assume it's stupid. Educate yourself. You have a brain. Use it. So I'm getting a little bit now.
No, that resonates a lot with me. I'm a big fan of Stoicism, and one of the core philosophies they talk about, kind of across the board, is how detrimental to the benefit of all mankind, but especially our character and like the work that Stoicism represents, and that's gossip. And like that's something when I really kind of picked up on that a few years ago, it showed me where in a lot of areas of my life. Maybe it's not full-blown traditional gossip like we might think, just sit around and talk shit about everybody on a regular basis. Whoever's not here, we're talking about you kind of thing. But just speaking in any way that is different from how I would speak to them if they were here. So that not only shined a light on where and how gossip was actually infiltrating my life, which to your point is introducing a lot of room for negativity. And I was like, okay, maybe I'm not in full alignment with the gossip thing, but I really know what negativity is and I don't want none of that. But then it also it kind of did the opposite. It radically changed the level to which I would be present with people here and the level of honesty that I wanted to have with them. Because if there was something on my mind that, okay, if you weren't here, I'd probably be talking to this person about you. How then can I present these thoughts to you in a way that is constructive and is going to hopefully kind of support the relationship here? So I guess, in a way that's also negativity, gossip, if you can really finesse these two and filter down, like it was a self-motivator, an intrinsic motivator for me to develop better and nurture relationships. It's kind of like a sneaky way.
I mean, I find it, if you don't erase those things or negativity from your life, how on earth are you ever going to have inner peace? I mean, it's impossible.
Yeah.
And the same, goes for. It's interesting. I think the book addresses two of the 5 levers for great brain health. It addresses this with daily development, which is one of the 5 levers for brain health. And brain health is completely decisive for your overall health, your long-term health, your short-term performance, your long-term performance, and so forth. The second thing the book also, I think, addresses is the 5th lever, which is the quality of social interaction. Now, one of the most important things is to learn to deal with all types of people and to embrace contradictions. A person that has completely different beliefs or opinions or whatever it is. But the normal reaction to that is that we get irritated or we get angry.
You're wrong, I'm right.
Yeah, which has nothing to do with the quality of the other belief or opinion. It's just that for me to understand what you're saying would require energy. And I want to save energy. That's it. So I have this recommendation that whenever you're in a situation where someone spots a gap in your thinking, which is actually when someone has a different opinion, find that as an interesting problem. That's interesting. Chase, he doesn't agree with me on my conclusion. That means that he needs to know something I don't know, and he also probably has a different thought process here, okay? Let me ask him, how did you arrive at this? How did you think about that? What did you base that on?
Your relationship to this problem.
Yeah, and then I would have a logbook But every time someone spots a gap in my thinking, I write it down and I ask the person how they arrived at a different conclusion. After 2 weeks, I have a Bible of insight to perfect my thinking.
Wow.
Wow. No, I should not do that. I should continue to be super upset when someone don't agree with me, which means that I will be very stressed every day. Yeah, that's a good thing. That's a smart way.
Imagine if we all took the time, or even just fantasize with me for a moment about if we had a playbook of examples that we could reflect on to better navigate conflict and to actually speak in a way that I'm sure we all really want to speak to get to a solution, especially in a situation where I think this way, you think that way, without perpetuating the problem when most of us are in these situations of me versus you, him versus her, right versus wrong. I mean, that's definitely the world that I would like to see and contribute to work towards, but we do have it. We have it in every scenario in which we encounter these scenarios. But it's just, are we committed enough to ourselves, self-mastery, like you're talking about earlier, and to the opposite side, the opposite way of thinking, to just take simple notes over a week, a month, or every time you see this person reflect back, think about how better you could craft a response then.
And I think to operate on what I think most people deep down with some reflection would sort of agree with is that all beliefs, no matter what they are about, are incomplete because we cannot know everything to have a bulletproof belief. But obviously that there are better and worse beliefs, okay? But even in the worst beliefs, they have some merit, okay? That I have not thought about, okay? Or maybe not thought enough about. That would just create a much better dynamic between us. And one thing that I learned early, because I think I grew up in a time, because I'm such an old man, I think I grew up in a time where...
a wiser man.
Yeah, I don't know
More
about that. I'm
man.
still a baby in my head, which I'm proud of. But maybe the positive attitude in society, I think, were bigger than it is today, and maybe not a big divide between people and all these things. But still, negativity is something that was with me and people around me too. People that things we don't recognize, or people are different, or something wrong with them, or whatever it is. It's something that we are born with. I think it's an evolutionary thing, because most of the threats to human beings through history has been other humans. That's simple. But I realized very early on that having negative thoughts about another person, especially, everyone, but anyone, but especially someone that I need to do stuff with, will just get me nowhere, because it just like reduces the solution space with what I can do with that person. And that person will also sense it, because you send signals that you're not aware of. So I was thinking how to do that. And I came up with the smartest way for me to think about another person, that the chemistry is not there and we're not there, is to think about that is actually someone's kid. And, would I like someone to have the type of thoughts I have for that person now for one of my loved ones? No, obviously not. That really, sobers you up in the way you think about the person. I find it very useful to have those small, I don't know, triggers or nudges or whatever it is, to snap out of when you go down that negativity spiral.
I really appreciate that. That's a great personal experience. Thank you for sharing. And something similar kind of comes to mind for me is, I want to say this in a way that doesn't kind of make me sound like a hypocrite and go like me versus them, right versus wrong. But when I found, in differences of thought, differences of opinion with people, or even just recognizing I'm talking with someone that hasn't decided there's more out there. They haven't yet decided for themselves. They haven't tapped into intrinsic motivation that they actually can change their circumstances. They can make a better life for themselves. They can have that hard conversation with the person that they're here gossiping about. I kind of just go to, they haven't gotten there yet. Because what that does is it immediately takes me out of the headspace of looking at this person thinking you're wrong, you're ignorant, whatever, and puts me in their position, because I know for damn sure that there was a place in my life, and in many ways I'm probably still there, that I was stuck in that way of thinking. And I didn't have the level of intrinsic motivation. I didn't have the tools, or didn't think that I had the tools to take action in the way that I really wanted to solve that problem and to move forward in my life. So it immediately takes it away from, I'm sitting here having an issue with you, to, oh, like, I remember being there, or I can totally relate. I can empathize really. And that completely just de-escalates that situation for me.
No, and I think, the way I think about it is also that, and it goes back to this, and this is something everyone should know, that yes, our brain rewards us for intrinsic motivation, because then we are developing and learning, and that's a key survival strategy for us as human beings. But it rewards us even more for being lazy. Okay, and that laziness.
That's the unfortunate biological honest truth.
Yeah, but we should be thankful to it also, because otherwise we wouldn't have been here today. So that's important. It's just that we need to figure out a way to. I think it's impossible to create a balance. But to understand when we should avoid to be energy conserving and rather spend some energy to achieve stuff. That's what I think it's about. But given that, it's also important that you cultivate compassion for people, because if it was easy for everyone to embrace the unknown, to welcome contradictions, to avoid negativity and all these things, and then achieve whatever they wanted to do, everybody would do that if it would be easy. So it is tough. And I think what I always do is that I go to myself with stuff that I've struggled a lot with, to set myself in the same emotional situation. I do that all the time with clients, because if I don't do it with clients, so let's say a client shows up and has an issue, and chances are that issue, I think, is such a non-issue. It's like, okay, I'll solve that in one day. When I was an executive, whatever. I mean, not all the things, but say one thing. If I sustain that thought that this is an easy issue, my advice to the client will potentially be directionally correct. Well, it will probably be too demanding for the client. And I probably need to view that
at that point in time.
Yeah, because if I think this is a one-day thing, so you do this. Okay, if I need to give clear advice, or if it's a self-discovery thing, it's just going to lead that the client will not be successful. Maybe I say, well, this probably will take 3 weeks to get the client's head around. And the only way I can arrive with that is that if I feel compassion for the level of challenge the client has.
Compassion is crucial.
And where do I find compassion? Well, in going into myself and trying to explore situations where I have faced a similar level challenge, not a similar challenge, but a similar level, because then I can see the world and feel the world from the standpoint of my client. Okay, that's it.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Well, Stefan, kind of getting towards the end here, I do want to ask a question before we get to my final question. I'm always curious, especially with authors, people that kind of pour their heart and soul into something so tangible like this. What did you find in pursuit of your writing that was true? Like, I believe this to be true in your research, and then writing kind of validated it or solidified a point. I'm curious, what really surprised you? Was anything did anything throw you off in your research, or what maybe something you held to be true kind of maybe had you scratching your head a little bit?
I think that the biggest insight when I wrote the book is that some of the stuff that I learned early on in my journey in neuroscience, behavioral science. We're talking about now mid-90s, way before it became sort of a household name and everybody's so interested in it. And it started at McKinsey when I did this knowledge project trying to figure out why it's so hard to achieve change in organizations. So the experience of writing the book is that I just realized that some of the basic insights I made then are still extremely true. It's just that I have not I've not had them as important lenses for everything I've done. It has not changed or made me do anything that's wrong or whatever. But one of the insights I made when I wrote the book is that you can only basically have two outcomes of engaging in professional work. Either you become successful, healthy, and happy, or you actually become dissatisfied and at worst sick from it. That's and I came up with this, and this is not in the book, but I was when I realized this after I wrote the book, and I'm doing some research and some thinking during Christmas. I just felt that this reminded me of something, the sickness or dissatisfaction path. And I said, it almost reminds me of, wild animals in captivity. So I started to read about that, and there's a word for that, psychosis, anxiety, depression, and strange behaviors. So what I think is that if you don't really understand how to unlock your intrinsic motivation when you need it at work, which is when you're bored, too difficult or uncomfortable or whatever it is, and things you have to do, you can end up in what I call workosis,
Great term.
Yeah, which is like, anxiety, lack of satisfaction, psychological whatever, and all these things. That's what I think. That's the, and so for anyone that wants to have get something better out of work, the path of intrinsic motivation is the path. There are no shortcuts here. And it's not that difficult to achieve.
I agree, and I think this is a perfect transition into my final question. Ever Forward, the name of the show, the mantra, to live a life ever forward, I think really stems from developing, strengthening, and keeping intrinsic motivation so that we know which step to take to move us forward in life. Those two words, what do they mean to you? Kind of through your work and your book, and your lens of intrinsic motivation, what does living a life ever forward mean to you? How do we live a life ever forward through intrinsic motivation?
I have to quote, I have one person in my life that probably have given me the best advice ever. He's a senior partner at McKinsey & Company. He's such a brilliant guy. When I joined McKinsey, he gave me feedback probably once a month when he sort of, checked out how I was doing, whatever. And he said to me that, okay, Stefan, you're doing well, but you're operating on 50% of your potential. And I'm like, in the beginning, I was like, take your meds, what's wrong with your head? I'm working like, doing all-nighters and I'm doing all this and blah, 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 blah.
Probably took it as like a little bit of an insult, right?
Yeah. But then I realized how cleansing it is to actually accept the fact that even if I do extremely well, I could always improve what I do. That is what it is. It is about not taking anything for granted. That even if I've been successful and everything's gone well when I've done activities A, B, C, there is no guarantee that when I do them the next time it will go as well. There's no because every moment is unique.
That's enough to drive you insane or enough to drive you forward.
Yeah. And it's a good thing. It has so many positive effects on your psyche and how you become as a person. I think humbleness comes from this. I mean, if you what is the common denominator between most, not all, but most of the superstars in sports when they are interviewed? they are extremely humble. Extremely humble. And some of them, they praise their opponent more than they praise themselves. You know.
Say for maybe Muhammad Ali, but
but there's always outliers. You know,
true, yeah.
But I mean, most of them,
Yeah.
you know, they thank the opponent if they played an extraordinary tennis match. Okay, they thank the opponent for showing up. You know, and really. You know, putting up a super great fight and entertaining.
Without the opponent, they can't do their part.
No.
Yeah.
No. And without the opponent, they cannot develop. So that's it.
Yeah. What a great thought to kind of end on there. Stefan, thank you so much for your time today. I really enjoyed the book. We're going to have it linked down in the show notes for you guys. Check it out. Intrinsic Motivation. Learn to love your work and succeed as never before. This was a fantastic conversation. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. Complete pleasure.